Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the what? You there?
Yeah, I think we're there.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Free Assange Vigil series. My name is Steve Poikinen. I'm joined this evening by my co-host, Andrew Smith. This is 37 days left until the start of the second round of Julian Assange's extradition hearing. 3,413 days since the start of the illegal and arbitrary detention of the WikiLeaks publisher and founder. And today marks 1 year. 365 have come and gone since the trafficking of Julian Assange to Belmarsh following the $4.2 billion IMF loan to Ecuador. So I think we should start a little bit by just kind of commenting overall on the handful of events that took place throughout the last 18 or so hours, at least one of which Andrew was a part of. So as soon as he stops being sideways, there you are.
Yeah.
And I really do. I want you to talk about the hacking and the general getting messed with on the Sydney stream last night, because that is incredibly messed up.
So I apologize to anyone that was watching that last night when it happened. It was something that was kind of an oversight and outside of our control at the time, given the circumstance that we were in with it. But last night I was doing one of the world's first 1 year anniversary streams with SORC Sydney. That's SAWC Sydney. They're the Free Assange group that's located out there, and they were the first ones in the world to hold a live meeting for Julian Assange, basically their vigil, like has been going on with Free the Truth and Courage Foundation in New Zealand and tons of groups all over the world. We were in an open Zoom call. The invite link had been set out, and probably about 10 to 12 minutes in, someone, I think hijacked is the wrong word, but just screen shared and started playing porn and yelling profanities that are more profane than any profanities that we'll ever say on this show. And it was just really shitty. I don't really understand what would motivate someone to do that aside from having some kind of monetary benefit, because given the context, given the people, there's not really anyone out there to pwn Julian Assange supporters aside from the intelligence community. So I want to give a big fuck you to Kevin. But I did manage to, I was recording it at the time. I managed to clip it out and add it to the second recording that we did with the Sydney group, and then live stream that until about 2 a.m. At which point, a couple hours later, the New Zealand group, Candles for Assange, Alex out there, picked up, and they actually had Commander X on with them and a bunch of other people. So overall, it still turned out really well. If you haven't seen that yet, I would like to direct you back to it, because it was absolutely wonderful. It had it had Lisa Johnson from Doctors for Assange on there to talk about what they're doing, and just the overall condition of Belmarsh and Julian's condition, and just a litany of things. She was a very, very intelligent woman. And I'm just glad that we were able to recover the stream. We kept the meeting going. We actually found out, if you listen until the question and answer and open comment section, that the Australian government has actually started preemptively arresting protesters. Where there was a gentleman out there, I can't remember his name, but Jacob had talked about him. And he had mentioned that they were holding basically a refugee support protest. It wasn't related to Julian Assange at all, but the government of Australia came 2 hours before the protest happened and pulled the protest leader out of his house, and charged him with federal charges of incitement under the 1954 Victorian Crime Act, I believe, if I remember that just off the cuff of my head properly. But essentially what we're seeing now in Australia is the criminalization not only of free speech with David McBride's case and allowing the ABC studios to be raided to seize the documents that he had released to them. Not only with the crackdowns on free association and freedom of religion, with the shelter and home quarantine in place, but now we're seeing the criminalization of protests that are following the rules. These were vehicle protests. No one was anywhere near each other. They were all within the safety of their own vehicle with no hope of contaminating one another. And the leader of that protest got charged with incitement. So that's terrifying that Australia is now charging protesters with protesting before the protests even happen. So I'd like to point out,
it's indicative of what we have going on here too. There's almost always a couple of state houses that want to pass laws criminalizing protest, and we have pre-crime now. It was something that when Whitney Webb was on my show the other day, she's personally like incredibly upset that there's only a couple of us that even bothered to cover the fact that we have pre-crime now. And this is something that now that we don't have free assembly, it's not out of the scope of possibility to happen to us as well.
Yeah, and so later on in the day, we had I would say the honor of streaming the Free the Truth event, which was an event held in the UK. It had Christian, the current WikiLeaks editor-in-chief. It was hosted by Deepa Diver, and it was just absolutely incredible. It had, I want to say, 7 or 8 speakers total, including Craig Murray, and they covered a litany of topics, literally everything from what happened in the courthouse the week of his extradition hearing, all the way down to debunking the rape charges. And there's actually a woman who's been working on freedom of information requests with the Swedish government that has received over 700 and some documents in regards to that case. So that's something that she's working on getting reviewed and published, and actually working on getting more information out there too. So that's something that we'll keep an eye on.
And that's Stefania Maruzzi. And if you're on Twitter and you're not following her, you definitely should be. She is a wealth of information, and she has been an ongoing freedom of information request on her part going back, I think, 7 years.
Yeah, so that's something I'm actually going to try to follow up with her to see if we can get her on the vigil to talk most specifically about that, because I think that would be incredibly powerful to have her on. And they actually had one of the guests in the audience was, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, and I apologize, but it was the woman in the UK that leads the Women Against Rape, which is a pro-Assange group that basically speaks out about the Swedish bullshit allegations and all that. So, big kudos to Deepa and that entire team that got that together, and it was just a very, very big honor to be able to be a part of that. But they also had a troll in the audience. It wasn't anywhere near as bad as what happened with Sydney, but if you were watching the event on ours, they were doing the open question and answer section, and there was someone that literally just started screaming, like Wookiee noise yelling into their microphone. So it's just sad to see that people are willing to be paid to be disruptive at these events, because there's really no one else that would be interested in messing with a free Assange event aside from a Kevin. So it's pretty disgusting to me to see, even on this day of all days, where people are assembling in a platform that the NSA can just simply pull the records and watch everything that was said anyways, that they have to send someone in to behave like that.
Well, and I think Deepa was the one who mentioned right off the top of the event that, like, the several hundred people that are gathered to watch this are basically like it internationally in terms of who is out there supporting Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and free speech in general, like every single day. I was talking to Caitlin Johnstone a little bit this morning, and we were trying to figure out how many people in independent media, period, they are who frequently mention Julian Assange. And it's like 50 of us internationally. And those numbers need to get a lot bigger if we're going to have any kind of an impact. I do find a lot of hope in what Lissa Johnson is doing with Doctors for Assange, and then on Twitter, her name is Katya's Compass. I can't exactly remember what her real name is at the moment, but she's in France, and she's behind the International Bar Association for Assange, the hundreds and hundreds of lawyers across the globe that are issuing statements now. Chris Williamson did a fantastic job, a former member of parliament who was drummed out on spurious charges of anti-Semitism that they first of all, they weren't rooted in any sort of frame of reality. But second of all, even when you ask the people who were putting forth these I guess, allegations that Williamson was somehow an anti-Semite, it didn't hold up under scrutiny, but it was still enough to convince members of parliament that they needed to get rid of the guy because he was the lone MP that was screaming his head off about Julian Assange and actually finally got a motion tabled, which means something different in the UK than it does here. It means it's actually brought forth for discussion about Julian Assange's release. And immediately after that, there was a false campaign to paint Williamson as an anti-Semite, and that got him removed from Parliament. While at the same time, they were doing the exact same routine on Jeremy Corbyn, who, as we all know, put his balls in a nice little jar and set them on a shelf in 2017 and didn't pull them down again until the day that England actually went to vote and found his voice.
And to an earlier point you made, I hope that the independent media, at least in the U.S., starts covering Assange more now that their current hero has been called out for what he has been for the last 4 years or longer. Because there's no room in independent media for people that aren't willing to put their neck out and make a video that'll get slightly less views and things like that when it comes to talking about Julian, in my opinion, because it's such an important topic, but yet so many people just ignore it. And it's not even, it may be willful, but it's because of the censorship boxes. And a lot of it has to come down to people don't go out of the way to try to find this information, which is why we started doing this, to make it easier to access, to make it something that's simpler for people to actually do, to be able to find information about Julian. Just literally clicking to the last half the vigil and watching through the news section every week where we cover what's happening. But to get back to the topic at hand, if you could, Steve, could you talk a little bit about where you were when, or what you remember about what happened a year ago when Julian was taken out of jail, about just the impact it had on you?
It was rage. It was unbridled rage. I immediately did a live stream about it. I am a fairly calm individual, and I was fucking yelling the entire time. I had been hearing, especially since around Christmas of 2018, within the people inside Unity for J, like an impending sense of doom was kind of building there. And the power had been cut to the embassy, and that sent Cassandra Fairbanks to London, where she stayed. But she basically kept her own vigil there. She met with Julian, and then as we kind of rolled into the first part of 2019, there were some distractions with like a botched coup in Venezuela. There were more and more rumblings of ramping up the war in Syria, and these things sort of just dominated the media sphere because we weren't really into the presidential race as much at that point. And then, April 11th happened. We all saw the lone reporter from Rupley who had a camera on it because nobody else was there. So we all saw the exact same footage. And I just thought, holy fuck, like, I've got to do something about this. Got to be able to do more about this. I can't just, I can't just talk about it anymore. Well, like a month and a half later, you asked me if I wanted to do the vigils.
Well, I'm glad that you joined us because it's been a crazy 40 weeks at this point. I've talked about it a lot before, so I'll give just a quick recap of it and how we got here and doing all this in the first place. When Julian was taken out of the Ecuadorian Embassy and sent to Belmarsh, that Friday, I think it was like a Wednesday or Thursday when he was taken out. I left work that Friday a little bit early, took the 8.5-hour drive to DC to try to join up with the protests at the British consulate, and I didn't make it in time. They had already wrapped up for the evening. The next day, which was Saturday, they had moved on to to an event with Code Pink up in New York, and it just gave me a lot of time to reflect, I guess. And that's when my idea of decentralized activism and getting people to just do what they can in their communities for Julian, or literally for any issue, but most specifically, in my opinion, for the struggle to free Julian Assange and save freedom of the press. And I'd like to think that we've made quite a bit of difference in this last 40 weeks since we started doing this, and within the last year that Julian was taken from the prison, or taken to the prison. And it's something that is more true now amid everything that's going on, that we need people to be that one lone voice in their community, or that one lone independent media creator that's willing to have a video get demonetized like all of the rest of them for talking about Julian Assange. Because there's news that happens every single week, and if we're not proliferating that information, then there's a reduced chance of hope, I guess. But something for the people that are watching, on the Action for Assange website, we have what we call the Thursday Toolbox. And it's something that we like to encourage people to do in the U.S. because it allows them to contact their state representatives as well as their federal representatives with multiple different ways. Right now, they are still on vacation in the middle of a pandemic that they still haven't done shit for. But send them faxes, send them emails, send polite phone calls, because at this point, and this was something that we actually talked about with Danny with Sydney Group last night. It's going to take a one-on-one basis. It's going to take an individual becoming a friend with an individual member of the House of Representatives or the Senate just by constant contact and sharing with them the information that's going on. Because if it's hard enough for regular people to find this information, then it's going to be even more difficult for people in positions of power that have to go through their daily lives making crazy and horrible decisions at the behest of the state intelligence committees. So use those tools when, at the very least, just when you're watching these shows. Put us on another tab or another screen, listen to us talk, and contact your members. If you're in the UK or Australia or New Zealand or literally any other country in the world, message them and say, hey, we need to get action happening around Julian Assange right now. Like, can we have a conversation? Could I book 15 minutes to catch you up on what's going on with his court case? And approach them politely, because you're more likely to catch bees with honey than you are with piss. So if we can take a moment, even if it's just while you're watching us talk and share the news and do interviews, to reach out to whoever you think would be someone that can make an impact for him, please do that.
If you're just tuning in right now, this is Andrew Murders the, Poor Richard's Almanac. It's a new series we're doing. We're pleased to be able to bring it to you tonight. Our sponsors are, government mac and cheese. And no, you're absolutely right, man. You're absolutely right. Look, here's the thing. Julian Assange has been illegally and arbitrarily detained for nearly a decade. This is a man who has not known peace in terms of like how any of us may feel like in fleeting moments in our own homes or out staring at the mountains or a ridge or the ocean. He knew that he was being surveilled while in the embassy. He may have not known the extent to which he was being surveilled. Certainly, we all have the ability to obtain that information now, and we've covered it a number of times here. I've covered it on my own show, but we know for a fact that from the start of 2017, when Lenin Moreno became the president of Ecuador, with significant help from the United States, he started giving UC Global, the Spanish security company that provided protection to the embassy, an extra set of instructions, and that was to film the entire embassy and anyone or anything remotely connected to Julian Assange. Video of that and audio of that was to be sent to him so that he could get on a plane, go to one of Sheldon Adelson's casinos, and hand that information directly to the CIA. We all know this now. Whether or not Julian knew what was going on while he was in the embassy, I don't know. I can't speak to that, but I know he knew he was being surveilled. I just don't know if he knew they were filming the goddamn women's bathroom. My point to that is, your Congress critters, as comfortable as they are, as wrapped up in their own little bubble, in their own little worlds that they are, the last thing that they want is to hear from the freaking peons that put them there. They don't want to hear from you. They want to go to a cocktail party. They want to go to a hooker. They want to go, wherever they go. But they don't want to hear from their constituents. So when they're forced to address it, that's when you have that one fleeting moment of agency where you can say your job depends on what you do about this. And if enough of you make them uncomfortable, even a tenth as uncomfortable as Julian Assange has been for the better part of a decade, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a significant amount of discomfort for our elected officials. And look, we have tried blowing smoke up their asses. We have tried being nice to them. We have tried coddling their supporters. And now we've just got to barrage them with content. We've got to barrage them with the facts of this case. Nils Melzer has done one of the best interviews ever regarding Julian Assange. And it is worth printing out copies of and handing them to random people. It is worth mailing a copy to your Congress critter or your governor or, people in your state houses. It is worth it because we're running out of time. You're muted.
Sorry. That's something that actually got reflected really well in a statement made by Julian's partner today. I don't know if everyone's heard the news yet, and we'll get into that video in a second. We have one piece of information to talk about first, but Julian's partner did step forward and step out of her anonymity today to talk about his situation, to get ahead of what the media was going to try to do. So if we could, Josh, before we get into that, I want to read an article published last December 22nd. This is December 22nd, 2019, from a interview that Christine did. Exclusive. The mother of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will not be celebrating Christmas again this year. Distraught that her son remains in the notorious Belmarsh Prison, Australian Christine Assange said that she has nothing to mark. All I want for Christmas is my son Julian to be safe at home with his family, under the protection of his country, to be free from the 9-year unlawful and brutal political persecution, to heal from the human rights abuses and torture which have damaged his mind and body, said Ms. Assange. Unable to speak with her son since he was jailed earlier this year, Mrs. Assange said, "All she has for Christmas this year are memories. Our Christmases were never boring. Julian would delight the children in the family with special Christmas performances." Mrs. Assange in her first interview, said Mrs. Assange in her first interview since his imprisonment. She revealed he would delight the children with a trick involving shaving sparklers and putting them into the mouth of a Tyrannosaurus Rex dinosaur toy, lighting it up and giving the impression that he was alive and breathing fire. And that picture right there, I think, really is one of the most impactful pictures I think that Christine has shared, because it just shows, and we'll look at the rest of them, the other one here in a minute, but it's really paralleled by what you see with Julian with Julian's partner when she speaks and with what's going on there.
Well,
But the article could,
and Julian really looks like his mom, especially like younger Julian. Really, like the resemblance to Christine is very strong.
she said Julian had a lot of fun with his own son Daniel, decorating the Christmas tree. He was a devotive, innovative, and playful father, she said. Julian would love to string up the fairy lights. We would make homemade decorations together. Julian's Christmas presents were always very thoughtful. He chose presents for the children in the family that would encourage curiosity, creativity, and inventiveness. He would give them art books and materials because he knew he would give me art books and materials because he knew I had a passion for art. I really miss our family Christmases. They have never been the same without him. There's something missing. We haven't had a proper family Christmas since he's been detained. Nothing is the same. And there's more to it, but I'll end it there. Just with that last picture, because that's a picture of Julian with his, I believe that's with Daniel. Yeah. For one of the Christmases that he actually got to celebrate it with him. And for those who don't know, Julian was actually a relatively young father. He actually postponed going to college, to a university to study physics for 3 years so that way he could raise his son. And I think that that's something that's, I don't know, one of the most noble things that a father can do, given the fact that Julian was an individual that whatever he puts his mind to, he could accomplish. So going out and literally saying, hey, I'm going to raise my son instead of pursuing this learning that I've done my entire life just speaks volumes to me about his character, even more so than the actions that he's taken in WikiLeaks.
No, you're absolutely right. You are. Look, it's easy to forget that someone who's been known just in the way that Julian Assange has been known, actually had a childhood and did father a child of his own when he was 18. And then you find out through his mom, he put his life on hold in order to raise him through a toddler before he went and pursued something that would be able to sustain a family in terms of the money that you need to make to survive. So then he went and got his degree, but he was there for that. It's so easy to disassociate and dehumanize, especially if you're unfamiliar with the story and all you've ever been fed about Julian Assange's propaganda. So this is definitely things we need to remember. Just last week, I had Tarek Haddad on the show because there was a case management hearing where it was brought up that the names of Julian's current partner and his two very young children may come out in the press. And today, preemptively, that woman, Stella Morris, went and first sent a video over to WikiLeaks, and they released it's like 11 and a half minutes. We're going to play it. They released the video, and then she agreed to do an interview with the Daily Mail. So they published it and cut it off got out in front of it before the judge had to make a ruling on it. Andrew's made the point a couple of times, and he's definitely not the only person to have shared the sentiment that the Crown Prosecutorial Service could have been dangling this over his head. The CIA could have been dangling this over his head. We're going to out your children. We're going to out your partner. We're going to make them famous in the press. They'll never know a moment's peace. So by getting out in front of him, she takes that power away from them. And that had to be one of just the hardest decisions that she's had to make in a very long time. So Sleepy Josh,
it actually got revealed too that the intelligence communities were trying to steal diapers.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Out of the trash can at her house
and
to see if they were Julian's kids.
Yeah. If she ever threw anything away in the embassy, they were supposed to go through that. If she threw a diaper away in the trash can outside on the sidewalk in front of the embassy, they were supposed to go through that. And the only reason anybody knows this is because one security guard developed a conscience for long enough to whisper it to her. So to whomever that was, thank you. Thank you for snapping to in the moment, being like, I can't, this is too fucked up. And you want me to steal a diaper? You want me to, for what? So good on him for doing that. If we could go ahead and roll that, if we have it ready, Josh. If we don't, we can go to something else. Okay.
By the Guardian,
groovy.
And therefore an instant.
I don't have any cues here, so I can.
We've seen a lot of.
I'll send it over to you. I'll send it over in Signal right now.
Okay.
I just sent it. But this is the 11-minute version. The Daily Mail published a 6-minute version of this interview with her.
Hello.
Whichever one, if you're watching now, obviously, you're going to see the full 11-minute video. There we go. It's up and running now.
Hello, sweetheart.
Who are all these people?
Come say hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Stella Morris. I am Julian Assange's partner. I met him in 2011. We got together in 2015. And we have 2 children, Max and Gabriel. I had received an email from Jennifer Robinson, who put out a request through her Oxford network that the case that she was involved in, which involved Julian Assange, needed more people. Our first meeting was in Paddington at the Frontline Club. I was scheduled to be at an interview. I didn't know who I was going to meet. I rang the doorbell and went up the stairs, and he was sitting alone at a table, which really came as a surprise, because at the time he was already a world famous figure. And he asked me who I was, and I said I had come for an interview. And he thought I was an American journalist who was there to interview him. So he immediately was quite guarded, and who was this woman who had just walked into the room? And I said, no, I'm here to be interviewed, which immediately relaxed him, and he offered me the tea he was drinking. And then other people came in, and I talked about my background, the fact that I was a fluent Swedish speaker, the fact that I had studied law, and started working with Baltasar Garzon, who was the international coordinator. of Julian's international legal team. In 2012, he took political asylum in the Ecuadorian Embassy. Just like my language skills in Swedish had been relevant for the Swedish case, my Spanish language skills, fluent in Spanish, became important for the political asylum context. I had been in the embassy almost every single day and got to know Julian very well. And in 2015, we got together.
You started a relationship?
Yeah, I mean, we fell in love, and this is a person that I knew well by then, the person I know the most in this world, and he's extraordinary. He's generous, and he's very tender and loving. On the computer, yeah?
On my phone.
On your phone?
Yes.
Yeah, you like to watch that.
On my cameras.
On your cameras?
Yes.
Forming a family was a deliberate decision to kind of break down those walls around him and see life, imagine a life beyond that prison. And so, while for many people it would seem insane to start a family in that context, for us it was the sane thing to do. It was what keeps things real. And it does. It grounds me. And when Julian sees the children, it gives him a lot of peace and nurturing and support, and that's good. And they're very happy children.
Good. Get in the bag.
In the bag.
Oh, my Tyson died.
I think we're both traumatized by what's happened over the last few years, actually. I compare it to being in a war zone, constant relentless attacks, that there are operations underway, and it's not some crazed conspiracy theory, it's part of the reality of the context in which everything to do with Julian exists. And just like in war, people fall in love and decide to live their lives in an act of rebellion, I think. Falling in love is kind of an act of rebellion in a context where there's a lot of attempts to destroy your life and your reason for doing what you're doing. This is the younger one, Max, with the cat. And yeah, that's a little one. There's a big little one. That's a big one. Kind of a same picture. They're quite similar looking when you look at them like that. And the big one has the older one is actually very much like Julian. He looks a lot like Julian, especially around the eyes, the kind of the eyebrows, and the gaze is very much Julian's. The little one looks more like me, and he has Julian's ears and Julian's size because he's very big, and he looks like his brother. but of the two of them, the older one is very Julian. Yeah, I've seen him in prison, and I'm struggling to think of how to explain it, why he's there, and so on. You also don't want to you want them to feel a positive feeling about going there as well. So it's a bit of a charade. I don't think people understand the extreme situation and pressure that we've been under, because Julian is a public figure, because everything about him is newsworthy. Anything can be used against him and has been used against him. And so this was a real dilemma about having a relationship in these circumstances. Means you try to insulate it and protect it as fiercely as you can. And that's what I've done, because that's kind of a haven, an oasis from the crazy context. I knew there was some spying going on. When I found out that my baby was targeted, as a guard actually went up to me and told me that they were trying to steal the DNA, I realized that I couldn't really protect my family. Even if I took all these steps, more steps than most people, to try to preserve our privacy and our security and Julian's safety, ultimately. In a way, it was beyond my control, and that was very difficult to realize. I understood that the powers that were against Julian were ruthless and there were no bounds to it, because there's a lawlessness around it. And, they were after my baby's DNA, but what else are they after? And that's partly why I feel now that I have to do this, because I've taken so many steps for so many years, and I feel like Julian's life might be coming to an end. It's been 10 years of breaking someone down, of trying to destroy his life, and it's a well-known pattern, whistleblowers, people who expose the powerful, they destroy them. And we know this when this happens. And somehow everyone has failed Julian. They've all failed Julian. They've taken every negative angle they have been able to. You can do that to anyone. You can destroy anyone like that. You just need to start overanalyzing them. Sweetie.
So if you have children, I just want to say hug them. Do as much as you can to just be grateful that you can spend time with them. Because even while the world is in solitary confinement right now, and while literally most of the human population has now been put under house arrest. We all still have a chance to hug our loved ones and our parents and our partners and our children. So, I mean, there's not really much that I can add to what she's said.
You know how fucking difficult it was to sit there with the camera pointed right at you and give that interview, right? Like, you're all getting that, right? Like, the amount of multiple stressors that woman was under just for 11 minutes of clipped interview. Well, I don't know how long they took to shot that, but that couldn't have been the easiest part of her day. And again, just she comments on the lawlessness of these institutions that are coming after Julian. And we know, we've discussed this several times, the ongoing prosecution and persecution of Julian Assange is a real-time erosion of the rule of not just international law or not just UK law, but Swedish law and Ecuadorian law, and God knows the US law. There is no limit to including refusing to release a man with a chronic lung condition from prison when there's a deadly virus inside that preys on people with chronic lung conditions. The extent to which these entities will go to make sure that an example is set, that you don't go and tell the truth about them. That's what this boils down to. Julian Assange facilitated people's ability to tell the truths about their own governments and their own corporations. Julian Assange isn't the whistleblower. He's the publisher. He facilitated the truth to be told and explained it in a way that wasn't spun, that didn't have an ideology or an agenda outside of access to information from the source of the information, without it being fucking dissected and whitewashed, sanitized, and approved by our sponsors for this report. Like, that's not how that worked. And all of these things have happened and are continuing to happen because rich and powerful people got embarrassed because somebody told them.
And there's a Daily Mail article that everyone's been circulating, and I just want to come through the pictures here real quick, just to let everybody kind of look through and see just some beautiful photos of Julian. So I want to make sure that my screen shared properly before I look dumb again. But
that's a gray screen.
It's always a gray screen. Hold on.
Oh.
Nope.
Nope.
Can someone else pull that up? It's not working for me.
Give me a sec.
But the pictures here that we're going to scroll through, if we can get them pulled up in a second, are basically just showing Julian happy and smiling. But one of the most disturbing ones, at least in my opinion, that we'll see is Sheldon Adelson's picture of Julian holding his child. And I call it Sheldon Adelson's picture because it was an image that looks like it obviously came from UC Global. And you can just scroll down a little bit and hit that +18.
I'm trying, but the fucking Daily Mail.
Yeah, I mean, it's how they got to keep their website alive, apparently, like they do. Anyways. Ad-based journalism is a wonderful thing. But it's just gut-wrenching, basically, to see it reach the point that a court will dangle someone's partner hostage over their head and say, we're going to show the world who this person is, or at least let the world see, because the way the UK's court works, they have reporting restrictions, and just the power that they basically get to play. They get to break all of their own laws, regardless of what they are. Everything, every word out of the judge's mouth almost has been from a pre-written script. And at this point, it seems like the decision's already been made. Even in the emergency bail hearing, instead of listening to the arguments, as Mo had pointed out with Steve on Slow News Day, the decision was already made. And holding this person and their children's identity hostage and saying, hey, we're going to release these, was part of that. And so Miss Assange put a tweet out that basically said her media request, which is, please leave these people alone. Like, this is the information that you were threatening to release, so this is what we're just going to put forward for you to see. And I mean, you could see just from those baby pictures that there was a mini Julian Assange. And that one right there was the one that I was talking about most specifically. I don't know for sure if this came from UC Global or what have you, but just that image from one of the spy cameras looking down at Julian holding his child while his partner is
it says IPC, and that's definitely a surveillance photo.
Yeah. So I don't want to just assume, but I would say it's a fair chance that that was released from UC Global or in those listed documents, because that's December 31st, 2017 that picture came out. So that was his New Year's celebration inside of the Ecuadorian Embassy. But I just hope that the media doesn't try to make this more and blow this out of proportion and try to railroad these people through this, because it's crazy that it's even been allowed to go this far, that there is so few good people in elected positions that this can happen without literally the whole world's hair lighting on fire. But I still have hope. Like, I still, at the end of the day, believe that there's enough people that care, even if it's only when they hear about it. It's just a matter of making sure that people still hear about it. And being that one lone voice, like we talk about all the time, is the most important thing, especially now with the world locked down. If you're in the UK and you're an Assange supporter, it literally went from 10,000 people in the streets supporting Julian to people not being allowed to be in the streets. And that support doesn't go away. Those people that turned out for him during the first round of the extradition hearing, it's not like those people have been disappeared. Like, those people are still very much supporters of his. And when the proverbial they let up on the world even just a little, they will be back in support of him, and there will be more. And so I guess just never lose hope, even as dark as it seems, because we never know when we're going to reach the crack that lets the light shine through in the other side, or what little movement you make that pushes the stone out of the way that opens up the other side of the cave, where we can actually collectively experience what true journalism is and what the actual freedom of information is. So I looking back at this last year, I'm just glad that there is still someone and people willing to fight for the cause of transparency and for people to have the right to know what the hell's going on in the world.
I quite agree. I want to pull up a couple of images from today that our friend Bean made, because these are just great. They are. The difference with Stalin show trials is that they were broadcast. I love that one. I do. Let me go find another one. Come on now. Oh, this is pleasant. If you're not already familiar, there's a website, somersetbean.com. All of the images that he makes that are related to the Free Assange movement are available free for download. You can go and take the images and make your own banners and stickers and posters and whatnot. And they are excellent. Let's go with this one.
And Kendra, who we had on Thursday over at the Denver Free Assange crew, actually went through, and Twitter censored a bunch of her messages, but tagged, I believe it was every single House and Senate member, state by state, with these images. And Twitter seemed like they had removed a whole bunch of them in the thread, but there's still a whole lot more there. So if you guys are watching and you're on Twitter, please hop over to the Denver Free Assange account and retweet as many of those and like as many of those and comment on as many of those as you feel necessary. Personally, I hope that people will share all of them, but right now it's just so critical to try to raise support because these people are home, right? Like, where else would the senators and the congressmen and all of these critters be during a pandemic? They're sitting at home comfortable with their families, drinking their champagne and adrenochromes and whatever the hell else they do in their free time. So use this time to engage with them. Emails are semi-effective as long as they're personal. A handwritten email generally goes through. You can still write letters. You can still call their offices, because just because they're on vacation doesn't mean that their secretaries are, because how else would they still be able to function? So I'd just like to encourage everyone to reach out to your local MP or to your local House representative, even at your state House level, and explain to them what's going on and see if there's anyone who they know who might be interested in talking about this.
Let's run through these numbers here real quick, because it's some just staggering math. We are a year to the day. Now it's a year and a day in the UK. That's an unintentional rhyme. Since Julian was sold to the United Kingdom for a $4.2 billion IMF loan to Lynn Moreno. 3,412 days of arbitrary detention, 1,526 days since the UN ruling that Assange should be released and compensated. 744 days gagged and prevented from doing journalism, and a kangaroo court, and 63,832 days await in the United States for encouraging a source to provide truthful information and for publishing that information. Again, I mean, that's what it comes down to. Julian Assange made it possible for the truth to be told about people in power and what they do if they're a government in our names, and if they're a corporation directly to us, and if you're a victim of either our governments or our corporations. Then the truth came out that people had been just hoping and praying that someone would tell, because they're sick of the slaughter and they're sick of the exploitation. And so are we.
And Chris Hedges, I believe that was who was on the Courage Foundation's event today. He actually laid it out pretty clearly, that, and this was in reference to Jeremy Hammond and Chelsea Manning, and Edward Snowden too, that they followed, well, Chelsea Manning followed what she was supposed to do, contacting her superiors, going to the press, and just literally getting ignored. So then it goes to WikiLeaks. And the government in and of itself and by its own devices and by its own power and procedures has basically terrified a lot of people to not release information. And so it's turned into the hands of the hackers and the people that have the ability to recover lost history and to recover information to be able to share this, which is, as he points out, what Jeremy Hammond did with the Stratfor leaks, which exposed so much about the inner workings of the darkness of our empire and the people that puppeteer it.
And Jeremy Hammond still finishing a prison sentence. Peter Thiel just got a we don't know how many millions of dollar deal to develop an app for the National Health Service of England that not only tracks you and traces you, but lets the British police and the Crown Prosecutorial Service know if you've got a cough or a cold that diagnoses whether or not you have COVID. That's what Peter Thiel's up to. Peter Thiel's helped develop track and trace technology and spyware that he then sold to ICE so that they could continue Gestapo-like tactics all up and down all over America. Peter Thiel's a scumbag. And he's getting paid. Jeremy Hammond, through whatever allowed Judge Trenga to have a change of mind about dropping the WikiLeaks grand jury, releasing Chelsea Manning, and dropping his contempt charge, Jeremy Hammond still had to go back to Oklahoma and finish out a prison sentence. He's still there. He needs books, by the way.
How much longer does he have left on that? I
don't know.
Only be a few weeks, maybe a couple months at most, I believe, because he was coming to the end of his 10-year sentence when they scooped him up for the grand jury and sent him to the Eastern District of Virginia.
I think he had like 7 months or something like that. I mean, it was relatively short time compared to what he'd been doing.
And to that extent as well, Reality Winner is still in jail. This is, I believe it's exceeded 1,050 days at this point that she's been incarcerated. And this is how they treat people that try to share anything about what the hell's actually happening in the world. And then they bombard them and smear them. And then they release the national intelligence protocols that puts leaktivists, hacktivists, and public disclosure groups on that same level as Al Qaeda and ISIS. And it's just the state of the world that we're in right now. I truly believe the only thing that can actually start solving these problems is just mass decentralization. And I hope that the terribleness of all of this government response and all of the federal response lets people realize that we need to take control of our own lives and make sure our own cities are sustainable.
Reverend Ian Chambers, who came down from Baltimore with Ian Schlackman to be with us at the William Truesdale Detention Center in Alexandria, Virginia, where Jeremy Hammond and Chelsea Manning were being held when we went and held our protest outside of it. Reverend Annie was on my show, and I asked her, what advice did Malcolm X give you? Because her brother was Malcolm X's lieutenant. This is all brand new information to you guys. Reverend Annie Chambers is a freaking legend in the activist movement in Baltimore and the DC area. And yeah, her brother, her oldest brother, was Malcolm X's right-hand man for a number of years. And so she grew up, she calls him Minister Malcolm. You know, she grew up around him and, you know, in that whole scene. And when I asked her, you know, what did he say to you that you could say to us that's relevant, that still, you know, means something? And she said, Minister Malcolm told me that we only get what we organize for and take. We only get what we organize for and take. So if we're going to take our agency, if we're going to take freedom of assembly, free press, then we are going to have to do that by directly challenging the people in power. And that looks like withholding labor, that looks like rent strikes, that looks like vote strikes, that looks like tax strikes, that looks like making sure your food secure.
I would say it even goes as far as to look like running for office if you're someone that's inspired to do that and cares to function within the system within that way. And maybe not for a federal office, but at the local level or the county level or the state level within your
Y'all
school
know how
board.
I feel about that, man. In order to run for office, you got to join a party, and I would not want to be a part of any group that would have me.
Well, most city councils, actually, you'd be surprised the number that are no party affiliate. Like, there's still a party, but school boards, city councils, you can literally be the freaking Parks and Rec director in a lot of cities by municipal vote. So if there's something you care about, organize for it locally. Get other people on board doing the exact same thing, because like Reverend Annie Chambers says, if we don't organize it and take it, we don't get it, because the world we live in has revealed itself to be the same as the world that killed millions of people in camps 60, 70 years ago. And it's the same world that had the bubonic plague roll through while kings lived in high castles. So we may all feel like we don't live in medieval Europe anymore, but we very clearly do.
Funny thing about that, man, they did a study and they found out that medieval serfs actually had paid time off. They had more outright vacation days than people that live in the United States in this gig economy. You have to go back to the pharaohs to find comparable income inequality to the income inequality that we currently live in. And here we are in our homes on lockdown, where people that the upper class wouldn't even fucking spit on rolling into New Year's, all those people are now considered essential. Withhold your labor. Go on fucking general strike. We only get what we organize for and take. Let's organize for taking some fucking agency. And a part of that, I woke up the other morning and the first thing that I saw on Twitter was, hey, if we general strike, what's everyone's demands? And at no point over like 50, 60 comments outside of one did I see a word about free and fair elections, and all they wanted was some sort of election reform, whatever the fuck that means. Nothing about the national security state, nothing about Julian Assange, nothing about, hey, why can't we freely assemble? Why? I get that there's a pandemic rolling through here, but this is fucking ridiculous. They're arresting pastors now. They just saw the CNN, I think, tweeted out that in the state of Kentucky, they're filming everyone's license plates if they go and assemble anywhere, and that those license plates will then be sent, and those people will be either arrested, fined, or put in quarantine. In the U.S., that's where we're at. People are like, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, no, we should totally give up some more liberty. No, we don't need to shake hands anymore ever again. Vaccination certificates. I like that Dr. Fauci. He's got spirit. We should listen to him. Sure, nobody elected him, and sure, there's pictures of him with the Rockefellers and Bill Gates' dad, but, we don't need to worry about that because he stood up to Trump once. So he's on our side. So we should walk around with vaccination certificates if we want to travel. Are you kidding me? I can't do that.
Could you pull up the article, Steve, that Ray authored yesterday.
Yeah.
I just want to go through the opening couple paragraphs. I don't want to go all the way in, but basically, Ray McGovern on Consortium News released a new article titled "What if ignored COVID-19 warnings had been leaked to WikiLeaks?" The British court system continues to mock the Magna Carta, bowing vassal-like to U.S. pressure to persist the Star Chamber's proceedings against WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange until he is either extradited to the U.S. or winds up dead. The judicial pompentine underway in London, under the guise of an extradition hearing, would make the English nobles who wrested precise civil rights from King James 8 centuries ago sob in anger and shame. But nary a whimper is heard from the heirs of those rights. One searches in vain for English nobles today. Yet the process stumbles along, as awkward and inexorably towards extradition and the life in prison for Assange. If he lasts that long. The banal barrister bashes Assange now seem to harbor hope that, unlike the case of Henry VIII and Thomas More, the sword of the Royal Knights will be unneeded to deliver the crown from this troublesome priest or publisher. The barrister may be spared the embarrassment of losing what residual self-respect they may still claim. In short, they may not need to bow and scrape much longer to surrender Assange to a life in U.S. prison. He may die first.
Can we just take a moment to stand back in awe of the talent that Ray McGovern possesses? Because this is a guy who came out of, being an analyst. He wasn't any kind of a prolific writer in his career, and for him to string together some sentences like this, that's quality work. Big thanks, Drew. How much of this do you want to go through there, Andre?
It was literally just that. Like, I loved that opening. And I'm sorry that I read like shit. I'm terribly dyslexic and words escape me a lot.
I know we agreed that I was going to do that.
Hey man, I'm trying over here. But I do want to let people know, in case they're not aware, there has been officially one COVID-19 death inside a Belmarsh prison.
And two that everybody knows about, but that Belmarsh won't cop to. Like, as of the beginning of the week or the end of last week, it was reported in multiple different places by people who have no reason to make it up. There were 2 people who had died of COVID in Belmarsh, 4 that had it, and over 100 personnel who were self-quarantining because they thought they might have come into contact with it. And let's not forget, we covered it the other day, Cardinal Pell, notorious pedophile priest in Australia, just got let out. He can walk, but Julian Assange is still incarcerated on remand. The English government's entire reason for still holding him is we can't let him out because we haven't actually convicted him of anything. And people are like, oh yeah, well that makes perfect sense then. If you're on remand, there's a presumed innocence because you haven't been convicted. That's not even backwards logic. It's like 7th layer demonic logic. Oh, quiet. I really hope that the appeal that they filed for his bail goes in front of a different judge. Because it's not going to go well if it goes to there's no business like show business barrister.
And the thing that she was trying to hold over their head for the bail, which was releasing the names of his children and partner, can no longer be held over his head as a way to try to hold up the bail hearings. Because that was the big contention in that bail hearing that took place last week was, well, we're going to need to put these names out there then if you want him to go on bail. So I hope that at the very least that he gets that bail release, if not just the charges in the U.S. dropped. But both of those seem unlikely at this point.
We should probably go ahead and close this out. We've been going for a little bit longer than I thought we would. It was important to mark this day. It's a year has been too long, and the numbers that we read off about 20 minutes ago signify an even greater length of time.
You can find me on
Strike. Go on strike.
You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. You can find us on Twitter at action_4Assange. Our website is action4Assange.com, where you can find our Thursday toolkit. We stream now every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern United States time. And short of today, we will be streaming an international vigil with our friends over in Europe every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. And I just look forward to having everybody joining us again.
Yeah, I'm Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it here on YouTube by typing in Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I'm also on a number of other platforms, including DLive and Periscope when it works. Thank you for being here with us tonight. We appreciate the hell out of you guys. Thank you to Christian Stefanik, who sent a super chat to my channel. I think there were a couple other super chats in the A for A channel, but I don't have those names in front of me.
I apologize for not watching the chat tonight. That's usually, I try to stay on top of that, but I did not.
I'm going to go ahead and preemptively thank Rob Juno for his super chat, even though I don't know if he sent one or not. It seems like it probably happened. At any rate, we will see you guys Tuesday. Good luck to us all.